Hello, my name is Susan Lauer. I am the administrator for Maharishi Vastu in the United States, and we are very pleased to have everyone with us this afternoon. We welcome you to this first in a series of webinars, the title of which today will be 5 Ways that Maharishi Vastu Creates a Harmonious Home. Jon Lipman, who is our National Director for Maharishi Vastu for North America, will be giving the principal presentation and also answering the questions that come in. Okay, Jon, would you like to begin?
Hi. So let's go on to the next one of the 5 elements of a Vastu home that create harmony. And this is, if we want to say that the earlier things we've been talking about are a little bit esoteric, not the sort of thing that people normally consider, this next subject is the opposite. It is so widely accepted that when it is absent, it has a health effect on us, which is recognized by medical science. And this is the effect of the materials of which a house is made. The effect when materials harm us is called sick building syndrome. And it's what doctors describe it as when our homes make us sick. Sadly, chemical sensitivity is more and more common today. And so the solution is very obvious. It's just use natural and non-toxic materials when we build a house and make sure there's plenty of fresh air. Cross ventilation is an ideal, weather permitting. So as a baseline for feeling harmony, we should feel health, good health. And a key to always having good health in our home is to make sure that we build of natural and non-toxic materials. And this is completely common sense, but trust me as an architect, architects and builders under the pressure of getting the next project done can fail to give this enough emphasis. But when we build Maharishi Vastu buildings, we make sure never to lose sight of this imperative. Susan, do we have any questions about the subject of materials?
Yes, we do, actually. One is, what is the relationship or, the complementary relationship between passive house design and Maharishi Vastu? Are they compatible? Another question that was asked was about comparing to permaculture. So
Beautiful.
maybe you'd like to do those
Sure.
two together.
Those of you who are not familiar with the term passive house, which is a pretty new term, and while its origins were in the US and Canada, it as a discipline and as a term was developed in Germany about 20 years ago, and then exported back to the United States and Canada. And what it referred to in its purest original sense was that a house would be so energy efficient, that is so well insulated with such good windows and so tight, having so little infiltration, that it wouldn't need a heating system or a cooling system because it wouldn't heat up in the summer or cool in the winter. Well, here in the United States, our extremes of temperature are greater than they are in Europe. And so what passive house means in practice in the US is a little more liberal than that. But what it entails typically, I'm getting a little over technical here, but if you build a house very tightly so that it's not leaking air and heat or cooling out to the outside, then you have to bring in fresh air. And so such a house will have what's called a heat recovery ventilator, a little system that just supplies enough fresh air to meet our requirements, but that air is all capturing the outgoing heat, or 90% of it, so that it's not so energy inefficient. And in passive house design in the United States, the goal is that the only heating that you need is the heating that you might add to the small amount of fresh air that's used in a heat recovery ventilator. because the house is so well insulated and has such good windows and is so tight? Well, the answer to the question now is absolutely we can and have, in fact, built buildings, quite a few buildings, 12 to my count, that meet the passive house standard. Maharishi Vastu buildings. We are doing it. So it absolutely can be done. There's a longer conversation to be had about how much fresh air is enough fresh air. We promote more fresh air than is the minimum required in the passive house standard. And we have some ideas about how to get it into the house so that it doesn't have to pass through a long system of ducts. But that's a technical subject that I won't go into right now. And the second question was, how about the system of permaculture? And this is a system I'm not quite as able to provide a very accurate definition of it off the cuff on this call, but in general terms, it is thinking of a house as not being separate from nature, that a house should be fully integrated into the web of nature, and all of our human interventions that might be a part of building a house and having a yard and having gardens should be fully taking advantage of laws of nature, of the local environment. And so the house that I live in, that I built for myself, this Vastu house, absolutely intentionally includes permaculture principles. One principle is that when you garden, you want to have those products of the garden that you use most frequently, which are your herbs, right next to the front door. And then the products of the garden that you use a little less often, a little further out, and a little further out for, say, the orchard, which you only actually use very, very seasonally. And so I've done all the gardening, my wife and I, in our yard according to these permaculture principles. And I have a client who is building a permaculture community in Southern Europe. And it's also, of course, a Maharishi Vastu community, and it will also be a passive house community. And so we are in the process of beginning to design buildings that will use all three of these systems. So that's the long answer. And the short answer is that they are very, very compatible and supportive of each other.
Good. Now, there's two questions that have come in regarding methods for EMF reduction and dirty electricity.
Beautiful.
And how to protect against,
Yes.
how to protect against these things.
And I have not mentioned this subject, and I'll give a very brief answer, and maybe we will have a webinar in which we can really stretch out and talk about these subjects at length. But we are in the subset of elements that we call materials, and the electrical system in a house is a part of the materials of which a house is made. So what is this acronym EMF? It stands for electromagnetic radiation, electromagnetic frequency, and it has been established for 40 years or more as a result of thousands of medical studies, many pioneered by the US government, that electrical radiation radiated off of electrical wires interacts with human physiology. It interacts on the cellular level and can alter cellular functioning. And under certain circumstances, with a high enough dose of electromagnetic radiation, systems and organs of the body can be significantly impaired. There is a percentage of the population, which we estimate at maybe 5 or 10%, who have a heightened sensitivity to electromagnetic radiation. And for them, life is very difficult because if you're in a building, there's electromagnetic radiation. If you're on a cell phone, you're exposing yourself to it. So there are certain protocols that we take in the design of Maharishi Vastu buildings to greatly reduce EMF or electromagnetic frequency. And the actual technical solutions I could spend 5 minutes on, and that's not the primary purpose of this call. So I will simply say that for complete health, we want to manage that risk as well as any other potential hazard in conventional construction.
Okay, what is the best, I think they're saying insulation and the best natural heating system and heating and cooling system?
Well, these are questions which the answers to which differ depending upon where you're building, what your climate is, and what the materials are that are available, usable, and even economical in your region. We recommend natural insulating materials, and the very best kind of a wall is a wall that is thick, solid, vapor permeable, but self-insulating. Now, what kind of material might that be? Well, one example is a solid wood wall, what is often called a log wall. Now, log construction can have its own problems. It can be very leaky. It can have a certain look that may not be appropriate. But that is simply an example of a wall which is itself insulating without adding any synthetic materials and which has mass. There are industrially made construction materials made of block with different names in different parts of the world. Some made of Portland cement, some made of completely natural materials that laid up as masonry can provide the same quality. There are almost every traditional way of building in climates far from the equator where heating is needed incorporate thick walls with insulation in them. And many of them, if they don't create, for instance, mold problems, are very, very suitable. So that's a wide open answer. And we have built Maharishi Vastu houses using almost every kind of natural insulating material that you could name.
John, did you mention the natural heating and cooling systems?
No, I didn't, and that's a great question. Much of the world doesn't, and much of the population of the world doesn't need cooling. Much of the United States does, and that's another subject, but most of the world, some heating is needed. What do we recommend is not forced air, not blowing air coming out of ducts, but rather that some surface is warm and that warm surface radiates heat into the interior of the house. An example of this is hot water radiators. Another example, which is done in Europe, but really not in the United States, is to have small hot water pipes in a plastered wall. A possibility, maybe it's not the most ideal, but it's fairly common in the US, is to have hot water heating in a floor. And what I want to point out, though, is we would not recommend this kind of heating if the actual medium moving through the house heating is electricity, if it's electrical wires that are heating up, providing the heat, because they would generate quite a bit of electromagnetic radiation.
And what about hot water baseboard heating?
Yes, any kind of hot water radiators, including baseboards, are a terrific solution, and they're widely used traditionally around the world. Another thing that has an influence on the quality of life in a home or in a building is what surrounds it, the site, the surroundings. And we want to build where nature will support a harmonious home. And so, as I've already explained, for instance, we wouldn't want to build on a site where there's a hill to the east of it. And as I mentioned, this is why we always encourage our clients to be in touch with us before they purchase a lot, so that we can guide them to buy a lot that will be completely nourishing. And so, in summary, these are the 5 ways that Maharishi Vastu can bring harmony to our homes. The first is right orientation of the home, and secondarily of our own actions in the home, major activities. Second is right placement, that is what we put where in the home. The third is right proportions or measurements or dimensions of the home in harmony with natural law. The fourth is using natural and non-toxic materials. And the fifth is the surroundings. And there's a whole hour that we could spend talking about ways in which the surroundings have an effect upon us, but it's common sense, and I don't think it needs any amplification. So when we incorporate these 5 elements to produce harmony, yes, they do, anecdotally and statistically, we can say with confidence, enliven in occupants' lives the qualities of good health, of happiness, of family harmony, of success, of growth to enlightenment. But those are just symptoms of something deeper that Vastu does. What it does is it aligns our individual intelligence with what we could call cosmic intelligence, with that field of intelligence that orders all of the cosmos. And when that is done, there is less suffering, we make wiser choices, and in many measurements, life becomes more successful and more harmonious. Now, I think I'll do one last thing before we take the last questions, which is that I'm going to share with you where to turn for more information. I'm going to do a little clicking here, and then I'll call it up. You already know our website, maharishi.org. And there are good books on this subject. For those who want a larger book with much more information, then what we recommend is Vastu Homes and Cities, which is available from Amazon.com. It's a terrific book, and periodically it undergoes new enlarged editions with more and more information on it. And some of you on this call may be developers, or you may know developers. And so we have the right book for any developer, which is this. It's called Enlightened Real Estate, Transforming Ourselves and the World Around Us. And it's written by Barry B. Shear with 1 chapter by myself. And it also is available on Amazon. I recommend it to anyone. It's a good read, but it's especially important for developers so that they can understand just what they need to do to bring enlightenment to their clients and to the world.
And one more question, people can obviously leave if they'd like to, but we've had this question come up a number of times. How can one become trained in Vastu building or consulting?
And the answer to that is, first of all, it's a really blissful thing to get this information. This is the crown jewel, the real prize of architecture, of building design. And I am eternally grateful that I, through great good fortune, stumbled into learning this. And when I did, and I saw the dramatic effects that it was having upon my clients and people just in their homes, I gave up my prior practice completely. I walked away from projects, and from that point on, I've done only Vastu. So I applaud anyone who wants training in Vastu. The training is primarily restricted to people who are architects, because it is architects around the world who mainly design buildings. And if you are an architect, there are a couple of additional requirements. You have to have learned the Transcendental Meditation technique and certain advanced programs of the TM technique generally. In some cases, people who are not precisely an architect but have some very closely related skills might also be able to take this training. And it's done as typically as mid-career training for people sometime after they have graduated from architecture school. I was in my 40s when I took the training. And the bulk of the training occurs in a very intensive 2-month in-residence course, which is offered every few years.
John, I think because this person specifically talked about building and constructing, we should also mention that there is a course for builders, which does not give them the training that a Vastu architect would have, but it definitely, you can talk more about that because you are part of that course.
Sure. It's a much shorter course. It's not as exactly as Susan said, it doesn't unpack so much the rules regarding how to design a Vastu house, but it completely orients you to those rules so that you're familiar with them and you know how to apply them. And then it also works with you in understanding for natural and non-toxic construction and how to get plenty of fresh air while making environmentally responsible and economical choices. And that course,
it's available online, actually.
Okay, great. Is it through MUM right now? Do you know?
No, that one is not. That one is, if someone wants to have more details on that, they can email me at info@maharishivastu.org. It's given through one of our international websites. So that would be the place. I also wanted to mention, I think it might be worthwhile to mention here, if anyone is a builder or in the contracting field, we are in the process of setting up qualification guidelines and training, basically, for builders specifically, as the need comes up in various areas around the country, to be qualified and certified as builders of Maharishi Vastu.
And the idea behind this program is that we are often contacted by people who want a home in some part of the United States, maybe New Jersey, maybe California, et cetera. And they would like us to provide everything they need. They'd like a design, they'd like a builder, they'd like a piece of land. And if there are builders who are well qualified and really want to build Vastu, we can pre-qualify them and then we can match them up with prospective clients in their area who want to build Vastu. That's a great program, Susan. I'm glad you mentioned it, and it may apply to some of the builders who are on this call. And I also want to mention on the prior topic that there is a continuing education course available through mum.edu, several hours long for more information about Maharishi Vastu. It covers much of the information in these webinars, but for some, it's a convenient way to obtain the information.
The next webinar will be why East is so important. And that will also be a time to really get into the scientific research, not only what has been published, but also some new and exciting research that's coming up that's in the submission process at this point from some of our very experienced and astute researchers on brainwave activity at Maharishi University of Management. Okay, I think we're done.
Lovely.
So thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to talking with you again.